The paper tore like a whisper in a cathedral, soft, deliberate, the only sound in the room. No Christmas music, no polite laughter, just the quiet crinkle of wrapping as 7-year-old Leora gently peeled away each piece, her mittened hands treating the gift like something sacred. We were seated in the grand lounge of the Whitlock Retirement Lodge, where poinsettias sat in perfect symmetry, and not a single rug dared wrinkle. Leora looked so small on that velvet armchair, her boots swinging inches above the floor. For a moment, I let myself believe this could be a memory she'd cherish, that maybe, just maybe, her grandfather Ambrose would surprise us all. She lifted the lid, eyes wide with quiet hope. Then I saw it. Her brows knit together, lips parting in confusion. The box was empty, just cardboard and silence, no toy, no note, nothing. Her tiny fingers hovered inside like she thought something might still appear if she looked hard enough. I opened my mouth to speak, to say, what? That it was a mistake, that I didn't know? But Ambrose's voice cut through first. Kids like her shouldn't expect the world to hand them gifts, he said, his tone as cold as the Vermont snow outside. World doesn't owe them a damn thing. Leora didn't cry. Not yet. She just glanced at me, a silent question behind her eyes. Was it supposed to be this way? And in that moment, my heart cracked in a place I thought had long gone numb. I should have known better. The truth is I did, but when Leora looked up at me 3 weeks before Christmas, clutching a half-finished snowflake drawing and asked, "Mom, do I have a grandpa?" I froze. She wasn't really asking about biology. She was asking about belonging, about the empty chairs around our holiday table, and why our Christmases never looked like the ones in her storybooks. And so, against every warning bell in my gut, I said yes. And when she asked if we could visit him this year, I said yes again. Maybe I wanted her to believe in family. Or maybe I wanted to believe it myself, just one last time. It had been 5 years since I last saw my father, Ambrose Whitlock, the former federal judge whose words could silence a courtroom and whose silence could split a home. After my divorce, he stopped returning calls. After my mother's funeral, he didn't look me in the eye. I thought I could shield Leora from that legacy, keep her world full of music and warmth, unlike the icy fortress I grew up in. But I was wrong. The idea of Christmas with the Whitlocks had started as a hopeful what if, something I dressed up in tinsel and rationalizations. I told myself Ambrose had softened with age. I convinced myself maybe grief had taught him something. But I see it now, sitting in this antiseptic room, my daughter holding an empty box. Some ghosts don't fade. Some just wait for a quieter room to haunt. The first thing I noticed when we arrived was how the snow outside felt warmer than the air inside. The Whitlock Retirement Lodge was stunning. Gleaming marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a fireplace that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. But it didn't feel like Christmas. It felt like walking into a museum curated for people who forgot how to smile. A valet took our coats while Leora clutched her little folder of hand-painted cards, nervous but excited. She had spent the last week carefully coloring each one. Tiny snowmen, stars, and messages, in her best block letters. She wanted them to be perfect. "Do you think they'll like them, Mom?" she'd asked on the drive up. I told her yes, but now I wasn't so sure. My sister Vivian was the first to greet us, if you could call it that. Her eyes flicked over my coat, then down to Leora's scuffed boots. "Still wearing that old thing," she said, not even hiding the smirk. A few feet behind her, Julian gave a small wave, but didn't get up from his leather armchair. Ambrose didn't even bother pretending. He stayed seated near the fireplace, a crystal tumbler in one hand, remote in the other. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he muttered without looking up. Leora stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, Grandpa," he grunted in response. She smiled anyway, then began passing out her little cards, moving from person to person like a hopeful spark in a room full of shadows. It was Vivian who pointed it out. A box beneath the tree, wrapped in deep blue paper with Leora's name written in gold ink, tucked just perfectly into the corner like it had been waiting. "That one's yours," she said with a tight-lipped smile, as if trying to inject cheer into the moment. Leora's eyes lit up. She approached it with reverence, crouching beside the tree, as though the gift were something sacred. I watched her fingers trail the ribbon before she carefully untied it. Her breath caught in her throat with excitement. She peeled back the paper slowly, savoring the moment. For a heartbeat, everything else faded. Her world, I knew, was still small enough that magic had room to exist. But then the lid came off. I saw it in her face first, the confusion, the searching. Her hands reached inside, brushing the bottom of the box once, then again, as if something might be hidden in a corner. But there was nothing, not even a scrap of tissue paper. "Empty?" Leora asked softly, glancing at me. Before I could answer, Ambrose laughed, a short, dry sound like a slammed door. "World doesn't hand out rewards just for showing up," he said. "She'll learn that sooner or later." My heart thudded. Leora didn't cry. She just stared into the box like she might still find something there. Vivian didn't miss a beat. "Just like her mother," she muttered, "always expecting something she didn't earn." The room fell silent, choking on a cruelty that felt rehearsed. I couldn't move. My hands were clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms, but I sat frozen, caught between fury and shame, silence and instinct. Leora still had the box open on her knees, staring down into it like it might fill itself if she just waited long enough. Her face didn't crumple, not yet. She was holding herself together in that quiet, careful way kids do when they're still trying to believe in the best version of things. But her chin was trembling, and I could see it, right there in the tight set of her lips. That awful moment when a child realizes something cruel was done on purpose. My throat burned, but no words came. I'd spent too many years being quiet in this house, too many holidays swallowing my voice for the sake of not making it worse. And now my daughter was sitting in the wreckage of that legacy, and I didn't know how to save her. Vivian scrolled on her phone like nothing had happened. Julian stared at the fire. No one said a word. The whole world seemed to shrink to just Leora and that empty box. I wanted to scream, to grab her and run, to undo the whole day, but all I did was reach toward her with shaking fingers, whispering her name. "Leora." She looked up, her eyes glossy but dry. "What do I do with it, Mom?" she asked. And I had no answer. Because I had never learned what to do with nothing either. The silence was so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. Leora slowly closed the flaps of the empty box, her fingers trembling just slightly. I thought maybe she'd place it back under the tree and retreat beside me, let me wrap her in my coat and shield her from the rest of the evening. But instead, she did something I didn't expect. She stood up, her hands slipped into the deep pockets of her wool coat, and when they emerged, they were holding a small, folded piece of paper, creased neatly, edges softened from handling. She turned toward Ambrose, who still sat smugly in his chair, drink in hand, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I got you something too, Grandpa," Leora said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone stilled. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Julian looked up, finally. Even I found myself holding my breath. Ambrose blinked once. "Oh yeah?" he said, his tone drenched in sarcasm. "You draw me a snowman or something?" A chuckle threatened behind his words, but Leora didn't flinch. She walked forward slowly, both hands outstretched, holding the paper like it was fragile. "It's from me," she said simply. "I made it for you." For a moment, no one moved. My instinct was to pull her back, to protect her from the cold that had always lived in this room. But something in her eyes, calm, steady, unshaken, told me this was hers to finish. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was offering something else entirely. Ambrose took the paper from Leora with the same casual disinterest he gave to a bill or a newspaper coupon, his fingers barely brushing hers, his eyes still half on the fire. I braced myself for the inevitable scoff, the snide remark, the toss of the paper onto a nearby table. But it didn't come. Instead, he unfolded it slowly, one careful edge at a time. And then something shifted, his brow furrowed. Not in annoyance, but confusion. His eyes locked on whatever was drawn there, and for the first time that evening, he looked human. He blinked once, then again. The mocking smile on his face slackened, faded. The room leaned in without meaning to. Vivian stopped tapping her phone. Julian set down his drink. Even the fire seemed to hush its crackle. I couldn't see what Leora had drawn, but I saw its effect. Ambrose stared as though he were looking at something not just surprising, but familiar in a way that hurt. After a long pause, he folded the paper back up with deliberate care, smoothing each crease as if it were something valuable. Then, without a word, he placed it on the small table beside his chair, stood up slowly, and walked out of the room. No one spoke, no door slammed, just the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they disappeared. Leora stood motionless, watching him go, and in that silence, something louder than any argument was said. She had reached him in a way none of us ever could. Leora stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't sure what to do with them now. Her eyes were still on the hallway where Ambrose had disappeared, her breath soft and even, but her shoulders had tensed just slightly, as if bracing for something. I crossed the room slowly, knelt beside her, and wrapped my arms around her waist. She didn't hug back at first, just whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it, and it landed in my chest like a stone. I pulled her in tighter. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking. "You did something brave." She nodded once, but her eyes still searched mine, like she was trying to understand a world that didn't always make sense. Vivian rolled her eyes from the couch and muttered something under her breath, but this time, I didn't even look her way. I didn't care. Because something had happened in that moment, something no one in that room could deny. Leora hadn't lashed out, or cried, or demanded fairness. She had answered cruelty with grace. And somehow, that undid more than 1,000 apologies ever could. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, hollow quiet. No one brought up what had happened. No one asked where Ambrose had gone. Leora helped me fold napkins at the table and hummed under her breath while I washed dishes. But every now and then, her eyes flicked back to that hallway, just in case. We left before the sun had even touched the frost-covered windows. I told them we had plans back in Boston, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to spend another minute pretending we belonged there. No one tried to stop us. Vivian didn't lift her head from her phone. Julian offered a stiff nod, eyes still heavy with something unsaid. My mother's old friend, who now managed the front desk, handed me a tin of leftover shortbread and a distant, safe drive. That was it. No questions, no mention of Ambrose. As we stepped outside, the snow crunched beneath our boots, clean and undisturbed. Leora walked beside me, quietly, her scarf wrapped too high, her small gloved hand tucked in mine. She hadn't spoken much since last night. Not about the box, not about the drawing. She just stared out the car window on the long drive home, watching the bare trees whip past like silent witnesses. I kept wanting to ask what she had drawn, what she had written, but something in me resisted, as if naming it might break whatever fragile thread had been woven between her and her grandfather. Maybe it was better left untouched, at least for now. When we finally reached home, she climbed out of the car slowly and carried her little overnight bag inside without a word. I followed, heart still full of questions, but also something else. Not peace, not quite, but maybe the beginning of one. Because in a house where love had always been conditional, she had planted something different. 4 days later, a small package appeared on her doorstep. No delivery slip, no return address, just Leora's name written in a careful, shaky script across the top. She spotted it first, nestled between the doormat and the snow-dusted railing. "It's for me," she said, blinking in surprise. I watched as she carried it inside with both hands, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. She set it down on the coffee table, hesitated, then slowly peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a wooden music box, delicately hand-carved, the edges smoothed by time, little painted roses circling the lid like a crown. She turned the tiny crank once, and a soft melody filled the room. Clair de Lune. My breath caught. That had been my mother's favorite piece, the one she used to play when the world got too loud. Tucked beneath the box was a folded note, no signature, just one line in a spidery scrawl. "To the bravest girl I know, thank you for remembering her." Leora stared at the note for a long moment, then clutched the music box to her chest, holding it like a treasure she'd been waiting her whole life to find. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. I knew. Somehow, Ambrose had seen her. Not just in that moment by the fire, but truly seen her. And though he couldn't say it aloud, this gift was the closest thing to an apology a man like him might ever send. A door hadn't swung wide open, but it had cracked. Later that evening, after dinner and homework and brushing teeth, Leora sat cross-legged on her bed, cradling the music box in her lap. She didn't wind it, she just held it, quietly, like the weight alone was enough. I sat beside her, watching the way her thumb traced the edge of the lid, and finally asked the question I'd been holding since that night. "Sweetheart, what did you draw for Grandpa?" She looked up at me, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she said simply, "It was him, holding Grandma's hand, and you were there too." Her voice was so soft I almost missed the last part. "I told him I hope he remembers how to smile again." My throat tightened, words sticking to the back of it. That was what she'd given him. Not a picture, not just a memory, but a piece of hope he'd buried long ago, beneath grief, beneath silence, beneath years of keeping everyone at arm's length. Evelyn, my mother, had been the only one who could reach him once. And Leora, in her quiet way, had reminded him of that. Not with guilt, not with anger, but with love. A love so pure it couldn't be dismissed. She hadn't drawn to impress or to earn anything. She drew what she believed he'd forgotten, and offered it back without asking for anything in return. That drawing wasn't just a gift, it was a mirror, one that showed a man he hadn't entirely lost who he used to be. A week after the music box arrived, another envelope came. Small, unmarked, slipped through the mail slot like it didn't want to be noticed. It wasn't addressed to Leora this time. It was for me. Inside were 3 short lines, written in that same uneven scrawl I now knew by heart. "I was wrong about you. She's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay." No name, no return address. But I didn't need one. I stood in the kitchen holding it like it was made of glass. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not because it made everything better. Not because it healed the silence or mended the old wounds, but because it was something. A crack in the wall. A hand. Not outstretched, but not clenched either. Leor never asked if he'd written. She didn't need to. She had done what none of us could. She hadn't shouted, accused, or demanded anything. She whispered. She whispered with her brushstrokes, her silence, her bravery. And somehow, that whisper carried farther than all the screaming ever had. The music box now rests on her nightstand, wound sometimes, but mostly just held. She says it helps her remember Grandma, even though they never met. And maybe that's the magic of Leora. She remembers the people others forget. She sees what the rest of us miss, and when the world turns cold, She doesn't match it. She melts it, one whisper at a time. One brave, beautiful, impossible whisper. That's her gift. And this time, it was enough. The story teaches us that true courage doesn't always look like confrontation. It often looks like quiet grace in the face of cruelty. Through Leora's small act of kindness, we're reminded that love, even when unreturned or unreciprocated, can still leave a lasting mark. In a world where pain often begets more pain, her gentle drawing offered something radical, a chance to remember who we were before bitterness took root. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic speech that softened Ambrose. It was the pure-hearted offering of a child who believed he was still capable of warmth. The lesson is simple yet profound. Healing doesn't always come from fixing the past, but from creating a moment in the present that says, you are still seen, you still matter. Sometimes the most transformative gift we can give is not revenge, not silence, but hope. And sometimes the smallest voices carry the deepest truths. Leora didn't need to fight to change her family, she just needed to be herself. In doing so, she opened a door none of them knew still existed. This story reminds us all that love is not weakness. Love is resistance. And in the right hands, it becomes legacy.